forward, I'm acknowledging from Dr. Kagape. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. From CU Manila. You may now raise your question, sir.
Ay, mayong buntag sa atong tanan. So I'm a proud product of MSU-IIT. And not necessarily a question, but it's a rejoinder of our talk today. And I would like to congratulate you guys for organizing this kind of talk, because this will bridge the gap between what we are doing in the field and what those students in all aspects of anthropology and history and all accounts of how we wanted to preserve Mindanao heritage and culture is relevant to this day. And one aspect that I think I have to emphasize in this talk is that we have to have the sense of urgency to promote and sufficiently protect the indigenous identities of the peoples of Mindanao. Because when last year I went to present a paper in MSU, I did a paper on the colonization of the Ukir as a Maranao art. And we noticed that there are artifacts already existing in Marawi City that are very important to the historical account of the Bangsamoro. One I am referring to is the Torogan, which until now, since I last visited last year, and prior to that, I visited the same structure 11 years before that. And unfortunately, it was not protected. It was not sufficiently safeguarded so that it will be sustained to provide a artifact that will link the aspiration of the Bangsamoro as an institution and that of the rich history of that Torogan, which is the site of the signing of the Dansalan Declaration, which is very important to the historical account of Mindanao. And in addition to that, there has to be also a recalibration of how we approach indigenous identity in line of how national narratives of national histories are being written and how globalization is also impacting indigenous identity all across Mindanao. Because we have to also acknowledge that in our island of Mindanao, we have many indigenous peoples who have been occupying ancestral domain territories, which are now being contested because they were not given ancestral domain titles. And there are dynamics already on the ground that are also disadvantaging these communities in relation to how the national policies are being formulated in the sustainable management of their ancestral domains. That is why we have to have urgency in directing the way we move forward in terms of connecting our tradition, our identity, and how we manage these institutional and communal changes happening on the ground. Because we have to take already a leadership role in terms of promoting the national heritage of Mindanao. Because you cannot anymore piggyback with how the national uh, narrative is being given to us. Because like the speakers were saying, we come from a diverse historicity of all peoples of Mindanao. And that should have been presented in a more uh, equal level, equal footing level with the national narrative and try to decolonize the narrative so that we will be able to now look into where we now fit into the national narrative of histories. And if we want to refer to what Ranaji Kuha was saying, that in the writing of history, there are limits to the history. And where do we now find our narrative as people of Mindanao? In the limits of history and how it was written for us, because we have to also acknowledge that there are colonial influences in the way our history is written. And there are colonial limitations that our histories are also impacting our communities. And this has to be uh, acknowledged and at the same time uh, recognized as something that will have to be overcome by the community in Mindanao. And for us to be able to cohesively drive forward and encourage the younger generation to perhaps look back how these traditions and how these identities are reshaping Mindanao into its modern era now, in the context of how the Philippines is also navigating its rough seas, is that we have to create a niche for our students all across Mindanao to appreciate their unique narratives and their stories and their indigenous identities. Because we have to always recognize all of this in order for us to be able to somehow give justice to those people whose narratives were silenced by colonialism and perhaps sidelined by nationalism in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights, sir.